Welcome, everybody. We were going to bring folks in from the waiting room. Hello, welcome to Daf Yomi, Week in Review. I'm Rachel Scheinerman. You're on My Jewish Learning TV. And we are joined today by Dr. Sarah Ronis. Go ahead, Dr. Ronis.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Good evening, depending on where you are. What a rich week of Talmud. I mean, there was so much going on. So I see some folks already in the chat introducing themselves, telling us where you are. I see a fellow Texan. Hi, Joel. And I'd love to also hear, yes. And I'd love to also hear what jumped out at you in this incredibly rich week of Talmud. And I have to say, it was really hard to decide what to really focus on in this half hour. You know, this week we started out with the one who takes a Nazirite vow in a cemetery and whether it works and what kinds of lashes this person may or may not be liable for. Then we talked about the Nazirite in a box in the cemetery, which was kind of charming. Then we talked about other issues related to a ritually impure person who took a Nazirite vow. A Nazirite who becomes repeatedly impure, and I don't know about you, but as I was looking at that, I kept thinking about Groundhog Day. The Nazirite as a sinner, and that's a tradition that we actually get twice in this week of Talmud. My favorite, Adiabani's queen, Helene, and her Nazirite vow. Then we finished chapter 3 and jumped into chapter 4. We're only halfway through the week. And we looked at Nazirite vows as, you know, we might say contagious, but we also might say inspirational. Husbands nullifying Nazirite vows.
This meeting is being recorded.
And whether those are also contagious. What to do with the animals set aside for a Nazirite vow that is either annulled or interrupted by death. Then we took a little interlude into intentional sin. What happens when you intend to sin, but accidentally don't? Don't you hate when that happens? This really disturbing interlude about Lot, and then another meditation on intentional sin versus unintentional mitzvot. So, I mean, there was so much in this week. I assume everybody else's heads was also a little bit spinning. So what I want to think with you about in our morning brief time together is a bird's eye view question that our Gemara raises for us this week twice. And that question is it good to be a Nazir? Right? Should you be a Nazir? Is it a positive thing to be a Nazir? And I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Anything is possible.
You're a co-host, so.
Yes. Amazing. It was more, can I share this screen without having everybody see the mess of tabs, right? Okay.
There's no tab shaming here.
Great.
That is something Yardena Osmond always says, no tab shaming.
I love it. So I want to start by going back to the beginning, which is this, the verses in the Bible about a Nazirite, being a Nazirite, starting with Numbers 6. And I brought you the Hebrew and the English. I'm going to just read it in the English, but for those who prefer to follow along in the Hebrew, it's up there. If someone dies, right, so someone has taken a Nazirite vow at this point in the story. If someone dies suddenly nearby, defiling the consecrated hair of the Nazirite on their head, the Nazirite shall shave their head at the time of becoming pure, shaving it on the 7th day. And on the 8th day, that person shall bring 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons to the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting. The Nazirite shall offer one as a sin offering and the other as a burnt offering, and make expiation on that person's behalf for the guilt incurred through the corpse. That same day, the head shall be reconsecrated, and that person shall rededicate to God the term as a Nazirite, bringing a lamb in its first year as a penalty offering, and the previous period is void because they ruined it. So at this point, if you take a Nazirite vow and you break it because you are, yes, I'd be happy to share this afterwards. David, I'll send this to Dr. Scheineman and she can send it out, but it's literally just the verses from the Bible right now. Anyone who wants can follow along, on your own Bible. So if you accidentally break it, you sort of have to start all over again. And as part of that process, you bring 2 birds to the temple, and one is offered as a sin offering and the other as a burnt offering. And the sin offering kind of makes sense because you accidentally broke your Nazirite vow. Everyone with me so far? Awesome. Those of you who have your cameras on and are nodding, I see you. So that makes sense, right? If somebody's Nazirite vow is interrupted. But then we get another piece. This is the ritual for the Nazirite. And here is a Nazirite who has successfully completed their vow. On the day that the term as Nazirite is completed, the person shall be brought to the entrance of the tent of meeting. As an offering to God, that person shall present 1 male lamb in its first year without blemish for a burnt offering, 1 ewe lamb in its first year without blemish for a sin offering, and 1 ram without blemish for an offering of well-being, or a peace offering, depending on your translation. So here we have somebody who has successfully completed a Nazirite vow and still has to bring a sin offering. What is the sin that this person is bringing an offering for? Right? That's weird. If anything, you might think they'd want to pat themselves on the back and be like, yeah, I did it. But instead, they're obligated to bring a sin offering. And we get this tradition in this week's Daf. We actually get it twice in the same sort of 7-day chunk of Talmud, which reflects a little bit on what that might be doing. And so here, this is from Nazir 19a. And I, again, brought you the English and the Hebrew/Aramaic, and I'll read it in the English. And again, I will absolutely send this to Dr. Scheineman afterwards to send this out. As it is taught in a Breita, Rabbi Elazar HaKapar Berebi says, what is the meaning when the verse says, and make atonement for him, for he sinned by the soul? And here, I think it's worth noting, they're using the verse from the person who actually messed up their Nazirite vow, not the successful Nazirite completer. With which soul did this person sin? But they're asking the question I just asked, right? What is the sin of a Nazirite? Rather, in afflicting himself by abstaining from wine, the sin was he abstained from wine. And an a fortiori inference can be learned from this, right? A kal vachomer, from the light to the hard, or from the light to the stringent. Just as this person, in afflicting himself by abstaining only from wine, is called a sinner, one who afflicts himself from everything, all the more so. But this verse, labeling the Nazirite a sinner, is written with regard to an impure Nazirite, right? But you're using the verse from the impure Nazirite, the one who messed it up and not the successful one. Rabbi Elazar HaKapar holds that a pure Nazirite is also a sinner. And this is the reason that it is written in reference to an impure Nazirite, because he repeated his sin. So every Nazirite is a sinner, according to Rabbi Elazar HaKapar. But the Nazirite who becomes impure is a sinner twice over. One for being a Nazirite and then one for transgressing the vow. And Rabbi Elazar HaKapar says that the reason that the Nazirite is a sinner is because they have chosen to abstain from wine. So I want to stop here and ask you for your thoughts about this text. I'm going to stop sharing so we can all see each other. Nazirite as a sinner because they are abstaining from wine. And I think it's worth noting before we jump into a conversation that the rabbis weren't aware of, the language of alcohol abuse wasn't a part of their repertoire. So they're not thinking about it that way. So I'm looking in the chat, and Leah says, could it be that even the pure Nazarite can be guilty of thinking of themselves as more important than others? Right? Perhaps something. Oh, and Martha, you agree, right? Maybe this falls into being, right, being arrogant. Maybe the very fact that you're like, yeah, I did it, is itself, a slippery slope to thinking you are better than everyone. Dr. Scheinman, can we unmute? I see a hand.
Stephen Burke.
Yes.
Yes, I think what this shows is that is how basically alien to Judaism as asceticism is. That I guess fundamentally Judaism does not subscribe to self-denial as a basic tenet of living or as a way of coming closer to God, to Adonai. This is shown that the old tractate Nazir is sort of I think reflects a underlying distaste for the fundamental self-asceticism of being a Nazarite, and very different from what you find in Christianity. Of course, we'll see what the creators of the Talmud thought of Christianity when we get to Tractate Gittin.
Well, a spoiler alert there, right? Let's not get ahead of ourselves. But I think that's a really important perspective. I don't know. Can we find Eva Kelly Hall? I don't know if we can invite, and I apologize if I said your name wrong. I don't know if we can invite you to unmute, or I'm happy to.
I just did.
Hi.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to invite you to share what you sort of put in the comments.
Oh, I just said that wine is how we sanctify Shabbat and weddings and other things. And so by purposely not participating in that, the Nazarite is separating himself from the community. And we talked about this another week as well in a different tractate, but could that be the sin?
Yeah, right. It really sort of thinking specifically about particular mitzvot and rituals that require sanctification. And certainly the primary way of sanctifying would be wine. For those who don't drink alcohol, often the next sort of way of doing it would be grape juice, both of which are forbidden to a Nazarite. And then there are lots of other alternatives that later halachic development allows, right? So you can say kiddush actually on challah if wine and grapes are not healthy for you. But certainly by that point, we're at our third option. So that it's certainly not option one. Yeah, thank you. I'm hearing a lot of people say asceticism just isn't part of Judaism. And I have to say, I don't necessarily agree. The idea that if any of you have heard the expression 2 Jews, 3 opinions, if you learn anything from the Talmud, it's that oftentimes it's 2 Jews, 7 opinions, 3 Jews, 12 opinions, right? And so I think you're absolutely right that there are lots of people in the Talmud, lots of rabbis who reject asceticism. But we've also seen lots of rabbis who actually think it's pretty important for at least some people, right? And I think that gets us to this question, which I want to say, Neri ask. Can we invite Neri to share her thoughts?
I did a search on Mary, and is it? It's not popping up.
Tischler, Neri.
Oh, Neri. Not. I heard Mary. Mary.
I'm here, but I'm not sure what you want me to talk about.
What you had said about sort of the food needs.
Well, I was talking about how, if we think about people who are, say, vegan today or who have other things, that, it may be working for them because of their political thinking or their health thinking, whatever. But then people around them get really anxious and uncomfortable. They invite you for dinner. What do we feed them? What can you eat? And then they may start asking questions like, why are you doing this? Oh, it's because of animals. Maybe I should be doing that. Or why am I not doing it? Why am I not even thinking? So raising a lot of anxiety and questions about our own behavior in the presence of somebody who's doing something different, which can then get into not just discomfort between the people, but also questioning one's own relationship if it has to do with God. Like, am I not doing this okay? If I'm not doing this, is there something wrong with me? And blah, blah, blah. So that's what I was asking about.
Yeah, I think in general, we as a modern society often really value diversity. And we really value having people with different ways of life coming together. But I think we also need to recognize that comes with a lot of work, right? That we have to all be putting in work to make sure everyone is comfortable. And let's be honest, work is hard. It's worth it. I'm not saying it's not worth it. It absolutely is, but there is effort involved. Yeah. Now,
I've got another theory I'll throw in the mix. I'd be
Yes,
curious
please.
what your reaction is, because I have no idea if it's right, but it strikes me that being a Nazarite is viewed pretty positively by the Hebrew Bible, right? Like women, we see women in the Bible bargaining with God, desperate for children, and offering God the Nazariteship of those children in exchange for having children at all. And it seems viewed pretty positively. And it strikes me here that maybe just what's going on is you have this whole big list of sacrifices the Nazir has to bring. And the rabbis are just trying to figure out why a sin offering, right? Like there's this list of sacrifices and there's a sin offering. That's weird, but I guess it implies that there's some sort of sin. So I guess we have to explain it. Like that's sort of how I'm curious what you think. That's sort of how I tend to see it, is that the Bible just dumped a list of sacrifices in there. One of them is the sin offering. And now we, the rabbis, have to explain why a Nazir brings a sin offering. What was the sin? I don't see in the Bible anything inherently terrible about being a Nazarite. And I see them sort of spinning their wheels a little bit. Well, maybe it's only an impure Nazarite. Maybe it's got something to do with the wine.
Yeah. And I'm so sorry. I don't know I don't know the name of this person, but I saw somebody suggest that, just giving up wine might make you angry and cranky, right? It might lead to impure thoughts of being mad about it. That might require a sin offering. I see another hand.
Yes, Eva has her hand up, so yes. I will.
And Eva, if we're saying your name wrong, please correct us.
Well, I say Eva, but I am not picky. And it's actually my teenage daughter, Nessa, who has a comment this time.
Oh, Nessa, we're so glad you're here.
About that being a Nazir is viewed positively in the Bible, but then the rabbis say that there's a sin offering and almost seem to think that it's a bad thing. That might be because they're completely different people. Maybe the initial, like the priesthood thought that it was a good thing, but then the later rabbis didn't.
Yeah, that's a wonderful point, right? And certainly one of the things that we saw either in this week's Daf so I'll tell you a secret. Those of us who write for the Daf, we're usually a couple of weeks ahead. So it was either in this week or it's in next week. But we're going to talk about whether you can be a Nazir without the temple. And in a world where maybe it's not easy or possible to be a Nazir, well, we didn't want to be one anyways. Could be another way to think about that. Yeah. I want to offer one other approach to this question. And this is, I think, for those of you who thought, well, yeah, asceticism is not great. I want to suggest, or not suggest, I want to share with you what the Ramban has to say about this, which I think is fascinating. So Ramban, or Nachmanides, the medieval biblical commentator, in his commentary on Numbers, says, actually, not every Nazir brings a sin offering. And this goes back to Dr. Scheinerman's point, because the biblical Nazirites, who are made Nazirites by their mothers, don't bring sin offerings. And does anyone know why those biblical Nazirites don't bring a sin offering? Here's a good trivia question. Leah, I see your hand up. Leah, you're muted. Can we unmute Leah?
I'm sorry. I didn't.
Fry Rabin? I don't know.
Yes.
Yes.
I have a
Here we go.
conjecture that
Mhm.
it is because they did not make this decision themselves, it was put upon them. Why should they be responsible for a decision that someone else made?
So that's a wonderful suggestion. I will say we got a couple of correct answers in the chat. A lot of folks now in the chat
Aren't they? I haven't looked at the chat, but my other conjecture would be they're Nazarites. Their period of Nazir that never ends.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, I mean they can't opt out.
Well, so they are a Nazarite
No.
forever. You bring a sacrifice at the conclusion of your Nazarite vow. So Ramban, Nachmanides, looking at this text, says you bring a sin offering at the end of a Nazarite period because you're stopping. The sin is stopping. Once you've tasted this heightened spiritual state, that you would now ideally be transformed into someone who wants to be in that state forever. And the fact that you don't is a sin. So we have this other perspective, right? So we have Rabbi Elazar HaKapar, who says it's actually a sin to be a Nazarite. And then we have 1,000 years later, Ramban say, maybe the sin is not being a Nazarite once you've been one. Which is, I think, again, goes back to this idea, 2 Jews, 3 opinions, right? This really rich why is it good to take an ascetic vow? Yes and no. Other thoughts about the Nazarite? Any other thoughts or questions? Good, bad, ugly? Let's look at the chat. Stephen.
Yes, if you don't mind me speaking again, there's one what they're called the requirements or the strictures on being a Nazarite and what you cannot do seem to me a bit peculiar, because the abstention from wine, the abstention from the product of the grape, and then the not being able to be in contact or close to a corpse. This excludes something that basically is a feature of asceticism in certainly obviously in Christianity and in other religions. There's no mention of anyone being required to abstain from sex, and therefore that is a really, as I said, a very particular interesting view of what is necessary to refrain from in order to have a more concentrated relationship with the divine.
Interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting perspective.
There's one theory, Stephen, I've heard of why these are the requirements. And that is that it is a kind of pseudo priesthood for these people, right? Just like priests have to always be in a state where they can enter the sanctuary. Two things that would disqualify from you from entering the sanctuary are corpse impurity and drunkenness. And so that it is sort of an opportunity for regular Israelites to act as priests, even when they are not of the priestly line, a little bit, like a little bit take on some of the obligations of the priesthood. But, sex wouldn't, priests can have sex, right? So that's not that. So that's why that wouldn't be on the list of prohibitions.
Interesting. I see Mark's hand is up and we haven't heard from Mark yet.
So I'm sort of a Nazir because I don't really cut my hair. Occasionally I have to cut a little bit at the back, but I find that the main benefit of it is I don't touch alcohol. And I find that a great benefit, and I attribute it to my spirituality being righteous and following a Nazir path. So in that regard, it has a very good influence over me.
And I think thank you for sharing that. And I think it's worth sharing, right? And it's worth saying we're currently in February. I know a lot of people who take a pledge to abstain from alcohol in dry January. And if you sort of look online, people who do that do describe some really powerful health benefits, cognitive benefits of challenging themselves to do that for a month. And one can only imagine for the rest of time. But I also think, right, I'm guessing, going back to sort of the social awkwardness of this, that this leads to conversations with people, right, who are surprised or want to serve you something. Or if you're walking around with extremely long hair, or back in the time of the temple, if you concluded a Nazirite vow and then shaved, we were walking around, completely hairless, that would also lead to conversation. So there's this really, there is a social component here that I think we really need to recognize. We have time, I think, for one more. So Leah, I see your hand.
I keep circling back to the feeling that maybe there are certain people who choose this path out of I'll say it, a form of narcissism. They want to be noticed. They want to be different. They want to be recognized, and they're not getting recognition any other way. That seems to be, maybe that is a factor. But the other possibility is that it may be a form of escapism. Maybe they know that a death is imminent, and they don't want to have anything to do with the burial, with the mourning practice. There are so many reasons why a person would choose this route. And I'm wondering, I don't think we've examined a tenth of what people's individual psychological makeup, what's happened to them, where they're coming from. I think there might be more reasons. There might be as many reasons as there are people who choose to do this.
Absolutely. And I loved that you used the word narcissism, because it made me think about in Nidarim, where we read about the extremely good-looking man who got worried that his sort of fixation on his own looks might lead him to distance himself from God. And so he took a short-term Nazirite vow, right? And so thinking about, is a Nazirite vow a little bit like a dry January for folks who want a reset? And yet for other folks, it does something else. And I think we see, right, there are as many perspectives on whether a Nazirite is a good thing as there are reasons why somebody might be a Nazirite. But I also think, it can be worth it for us. And I'll end with this, as we're going through the Daf and we are doing, trying to chart out, okay, so what do you do with this sacrifice if this thing happens? I think it's always worth just taking that step back and saying, what even is a Nazirite? Is this even something we should be doing? And just asking the question, can sort of reset us to come back into those details about sacrifices and hair cutting and all of those pieces, right? We need to make sure we're not just seeing the trees, we're also seeing the forest and then going back to the trees. Yes. Have a wonderful week, everyone. It was really nice to spend this half hour with you, and good luck in the DAF next week.
Yeah, and thank you, Dr. Ross, for leading a very interactive class. It's really nice to hear from folks on the call, and I always learn a lot from your perspectives. And it is interesting because apart from Mark, I haven't met too many modern Nazarites. So thinking about what this could mean socially and what it could do for people is really as just as a category of Judaism that just isn't so common anymore. And should we bring it back? And what could it do for people today? You know, I think it's not something we talk about very much, but because we're doing the whole Talmud, we got to talk about it for a couple of months. So thank you for bringing some great text, for a nice overview at the beginning. Thank you all for your really interesting comments and enlightening comments. And we will see you in your inbox tomorrow morning, and we'll see you in this space in 1 week. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.